Potted career history. Okay, well, I started off in the wonderful world of toilet cleaners with Procter & Gamble as a brand manager there, following an education that included a degree in economics at St Andrews and then an MBA in America on scholarship after that. I then worked in consultancy for a few years, then kind of fell on my feet a bit, I guess, and ended up as head of brand management at British Airways, which was a really good time to be there. Got to do some exciting things like putting beds into aeroplanes in the mid-90s. Then moved into my first chief executive role, which was at Eurostar. First of all, managing director in the UK, and then I took over as group chief executive. Then I ran a bank for a while as chief executive of Sainsbury's Bank. And for the last 10 years or so, I've been on my own, working with organisations around the world on innovation, on how do you put the customer at the centre, and particularly around this whole idea of performance and leadership performance. The Master Thief title came about a few years ago from the Inspired Leaders Network, based on my track record of stealing ideas from one place to another. To be honest, I'd never realised I was doing that. I'd gone from industry to industry, and if you're going as the non-railwayman into the railway, or the non-airline man into the airline, or the non-banker into the bank, you've got to bring some other skill set or some other knowledge, because otherwise they'd have hired a banker or an airline man. So I'd kind of gotten naturally into this idea of bringing skill sets from one industry to another, some of the Procter & Gamble disciplines into the airline, what I learned at the airline into the railway. And it kind of just came naturally because it was the only way I could add any credibility where I went. But then I took it on a level and said, well, what if you did that deliberately? And that's when I started using things like, yacht designers to do beds in aeroplanes, or Disney to help with the queuing at the airports, because I started looking for other places where there was a pocket of skill that the particular challenge merited having a look at. I think it's fair to say that the method I've used in each of the organisations I've gone into is very, very similar, and it always has the customer right at the centre of the change. Whatever the issue is, whether it's a company like Eurostar losing £200 million a year, or whether it's British Airways trying to get up to the next level, it's always about change the way you look at the customer as your starting point. If you look at the customers in the same way as before, you get the same answers and keep doing the same things. So you change the way you look at the customer, you use that learning to create a new way of putting the customer at the centre of the business, and then you look to other sources of inspiration. But it always starts with the customer. I think the interesting thing about going into a large company is they're a large company because they've been successful. So I can't go in there and pretend that suddenly I'm this expert who's going to show them everything. They are very successful in what they do. All I'm bringing in is an injection of outside thinking and outside perspective. And it is difficult sometimes because, of course, in every organisation you've got a lot of very successful people that got successful by doing things a certain way. And you're an agent of change, you're a catalyst, you're asking them to do something different. And for some people, they embrace that and love it. Others will resist it. At British Airways, we used to call it reverse football. The idea being that in reverse football, there's 22 referees for every player instead of the other way around. 22 people saying, well, you may have done that with your toilet cleaners, but you're not doing it in my aircraft. And the idea is spot the players. Don't assume you can take everybody on at the same speed. It won't happen. You've got to spot the players and work with them. Yes, customer benefits I use a lot, and this is the whole idea that you need to change the platform for your activity. If you want to get a change in what you do, instead of thinking about describing what you do, the idea is that you think about what's the benefit to the customer as a result of me being brilliant. And what you're actually doing is changing your job description. So in British Airways, we used to talk about how good our product was. You then change that into, it's all about helping people arrive ready for business. I worked with a bank recently where it was all about the banking products, but actually what the customer was interested in was their ambition as a business. So you need to do everything in terms of the ambition for their business. If you take something like your business, if you take something like NMP Live, for example, what business are you actually in? Yes, you provide speakers or comedians or whatever, but if you think what you're really in the business of, you're in the business of inspiration. I guess you're in the business of education sometimes, and probably in the business of entertainment. That's actually what your companies are looking for. And I suspect most of the time it's probably all three or a combination. But that's what the customer gets, as opposed to, now, how the customer gets that is because you're very good at sourcing speakers or whatever. But what the customer's interested in is inspiring their people or educating their people or entertaining their people. So that's how you have to see your business, would be the way the model would work. Competitive advantage for me comes from four challenges that I think any business faces. First of all, you've got to understand the customer better than your competitors do. Everybody at the press of a button on the internet these days can get lots and lots of information and data about customers. Your job is you've got to get some sort of understanding about the customer that no one else has got yet. And that involves looking at the customer in a different way and different techniques. And that's what I talk about quite a lot, is different ways. Secondly, you've got to create a platform for what you're trying to do that sets an ambition that is competitive. There's no point in saying we're going in this direction. You've got to be saying we're going that far in this direction and we're going to be better than other people, or we're going to be the best, or we're going to be the first, or we're going to be the only. Words like that are quite important in how you set the ambition, because they make a big, big difference to whether you actually really do become competitive or not. Thirdly, you've got to find sources of inspiration that your competitors are not getting. If you only look at everything that's going on in your own industry, you are not really getting a competitive advantage. You're just copying everybody else. So you've got to find ways of articulating your issues in a way that you can go into other industries, other disciplines, other places to find ideas that you can bring in. And then the fourth one is, don't forget that you can be hugely competitive by the way you talk to customers. There are huge examples of organisations whose product or service is not actually that much better than anybody else's, but they connected with the customer in a way that others couldn't. And that's just as valid a way of becoming competitive as changing your product. In my keynote presentations, I'm telling stories, and they're war stories about, Eurostar or British Airways or Procter & Gamble, and I'm bringing to life the concepts that I talk about looking at the customer in a different way, creating a new platform for how you drive forward, looking to ideas from new places, or changing the way you engage, the kind of 4 challenges. But they're stories, I'm bringing it to life and hopefully inspiring people to think about, here's some lessons I've learned, maybe there's something in here for you. You take those same principles into workshops and masterclasses, but this time what you're doing is you're doing the same stories, whatever, but then you say, now let's have a go at it in your context. Let's write your customer promise. Let's look at your customer understanding. Let's look for your issues, where else we could go to find other places. So it's an extended version of the keynote in many ways, but actually with some practical workshops where we're going to go and do it. That's one kind of masterclass and workshop. The other one are where I physically take people into other environments where we focus just on where else could we learn, and I'll actually bring in those people, or we'll go and see them ourselves. Let's go to the RNLI down in Poole in Dorset and look at how they do speed and efficiency. Let's find out what they do. Let's go and talk to some musicians about how they engage with their audience. Let's go and talk to the army about how they make decisions under pressure in crisis situations. So sometimes it can be about actually bringing people in or taking other people to other places where they've already defined their issue. What they're looking for is new inspiration. The speakers that I see are all so totally different, and they've all got a message. And you get some that are like me that kind of leap around the stage like a mad thing. You get some that are far more cerebral and sit back. And I don't think it matters. I think you see a multitude of different styles. I don't think it's about the style. For me, and personally, the things that I try and work on and learn from are, most of all, it's got to be real and it's got to be practical. So I'm telling real stories about real situations as somebody that's actually done it. I've been there in a business that was losing £200 million. I've had to do the turnarounds. And I think it's really important that people don't just hear academic stories, they hear from somebody that's actually had to do it, because that learning is very different from just, writing the theory about it. You've got to engage with the audience. You've got to make it relevant. I'm going into lots of different industries and lots of different disciplines, which are not necessarily ones I've worked in or ones that I've been. So I've got to have an ability to build the link so that they understand that even though I'm telling a story about British Airways, here's why the principles that came out of it are actually very, very relevant to you. So I see myself partly as a translator. So it's not just tell my story, it's act as a translator as well, so that the guy sitting there can see what they might do differently tomorrow at their desk as a result of it, rather than just, that was a nice story about the airline, but I'm not sure what it means. When the audience leave the auditorium, I hope they feel enthused that it's actually very simple. Although the tasks, when you put all the complexity of your own business on, seem tough and whatever, there are actually some very simple ways of approaching it that can help inspire you to look at it in a different way and find new and exciting ways of approaching those challenges. That's what I want people to think. Yes, it's nice if they've been entertained. Yes, it's nice if they thought, oh, that's quite an interesting story. I found out a bit about the airlines or the railways. But more importantly, I want them to go out thinking, I can do this.